What I want to do in this exercise is introduce you to graphing information from pivot tables. Now, when you open up this file, the pivot table and graphing, I apologize, there's another worksheet in here under the tab Sheet 2 where you shouldn't work. So what you want to do is click on the STCPR dataset right here and bring this information up. You'll also probably want to click on Enable Editing up here. Oftentimes when you open up an Excel file or any Office file, they prevent you from editing it until you're absolutely sure that you want to edit it. It's called Protected View. So let's click on Enable Editing, and that will open the sheet up again and allow you to start editing things. Now, in the previous exercise, we talked a lot about pivot tables and how they can be used to summarize the data. Now, in this data sheet, I've already filled in much of this BMI information here, and so all we're going to do in this exercise is first summarize the data, and then we're going to go ahead and graph it. So let's go ahead and start summarizing the data set. What we're going to do is click on A1, and then I use the shortcut key. You can feel free to just use your mouse and click and drag, but I like the shortcut key Control Shift, hold those down together, right selects all of that, and Control Shift down selects all of that. It's an easy way of maneuvering around an Excel worksheet. Next, once you have this selected, you've now selected the data that you are going to summarize. Go ahead and click Insert and Pivot Table. And now we can insert the pivot table into a new worksheet, or we can insert it into an existing worksheet. Now, your choice of what to do is entirely up to you. I often insert things into existing worksheets in my own statistics data sets because it reduces the number of total worksheets and it allows me to modify data and refresh the pivot table in the same worksheet. It's up to you. In this one, we're going to go ahead and click on New Worksheet and press OK. And this will create a new tab called Sheet 1. And you should see the pivot table fields on the right-hand side. If you don't, the reason is probably because either you're not selecting the pivot table. See, if I go off of it, it makes things disappear. Or if I click on the pivot table and you're still not seeing it, then chances are you just don't have the field list icon selected. So click on the pivot table and then go to pivot table and analyze and make sure that field list right here is selected. And that should bring this up. Now, what we want to do first is select gender, move that down to rows, and let's select weight loss and bring that down to values. Okay? Now, the rows category is what we are summarizing, and the values category is what the data that we're summarizing of those categories. Okay, so think of the rows as categories and think of the values as your data. Now, the default in Excel is to give you the sum, the sum value. But we don't want that. We want the average. So double click on sum of weight loss and click on average. And this gives you the average weight loss for females and males. Let's go ahead and select that. And again, I use my Control Shift and arrow to select. And I can go ahead and I can just either I can say Control Shift right, and that selects that. And then if I hit Control Shift down, it goes all the way down. I don't want to go all the way down. I actually just want to go up one more, so I'll take my finger off of Control. These shortcut keys really are helpful to help you maneuver around, but it takes a little bit of getting used to. In any case, whatever you do, you want to select these two. You don't want to select everything, you just want to select these two. The reason is because if we select everything, and we paste that down, what we've done is we've essentially created another pivot table. And we know that because when we click on that, it opens up another pivot table field. We don't want that. We want to keep it out of the pivot table. So oops. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete that. And instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on just the data set here, and I'm going to copy that, and I'll put it right here. And you'll notice that if we click on this now, it doesn't open up another pivot table field box because we're not in a pivot table anymore. And the reason I like to work outside of a pivot table is because I can then manipulate the pivot table without affecting the subsequent graphs that we're going to make. Let me show you. Select this data and then go to Insert, and we're going to insert a two-dimensional bar graph. Now you're going to use this a lot, so make sure that you know where this is. Under next to recommended charts, where it gives you the 2D column, all right, you're going to click on this first one, not on this stacked column bar, not on this one, not on the three-dimensional column. As I mentioned in class, do not use three-dimensional graphs. You're going to click on this one. And this gives us a quick summary graph of weight loss for females and males. And you'll notice that Excel already put in the female and the male categories on the x-axis, but it doesn't know what to put on the y-axis category because we haven't told that. So let's go ahead and first change the chart title. So let's click on chart title and change this to weight loss of females, males. Okay. And let's go ahead and add a chart title. Or let's click on Add Chart Element up in the upper left here and go to Axis Titles and select Primary Vertical. We're going to tell Excel what our units are, and this is very important. I expect this in your graphs, is that you need to tell the reader what the unit is. And so you can type in kilograms. You can either type out the full word, kilograms, or you can just type in kg for kilograms. Click off of the graph, and that is one of the graphs that is useful to summarize this data. It appears as though females in general, regardless of diet type, lost more weight than the males did. Next, what we want to do is summarize diet type. Okay, so let's click back on the pivot table, and again, the pivot table fields box should show up. If it doesn't, you want to go to Pivot Table Analyze tab and make sure that this field box is checked. Instead of gender right now, what we're going to do is click and drag gender off, and we are going to put diet type down. Now, this gives us the average weight loss for the cookie diet, the Kangatarian diet, and the Politarian diet. As I might remind you, these two are actual diets if you Wikipedia them. I'm not kidding you. And then the cookie diet is just the diet that I wish existed. And notice that it doesn't say sum this time, and that's because we already changed it to average. And Excel isn't going to change it back to sum unless we put in a completely new value set in there. And now you notice that instead of sum, it puts in count, and Excel is trying to be fancy, and don't worry about that. We're going to take that out. Don't do that. Now, what we're going to do again is copy those cells out of the pivot table and put them down here. And we're going to do the exact same graphing technique as you saw before. Again, you want to select those and go to Insert and place this bar graph right here into it. Now, it just put it right over top of it. If it did that for you, all you have to do is click on it and drag it off. All right, seems unwise for Excel to do that, but whatever. And I also want to point out right now that we were able to change this pivot table without this graph being changed. And that is one of the strengths of copying the data outside of the pivot table, putting it somewhere else, because then we can use our pivot table, we can change our pivot table, and the graphs themselves don't change. And that is particularly useful for a lot of the stuff that we're going to do in this class. Now, let's go ahead and change this chart title again. You always want to change the chart title. And we're going to say weight loss by diet type. And because this is a completely made up data set and this diets. These diets are the values are stuff that I just programmed in. The cookie diet, of course, lost the most diet because that's the world that I want to live in. So we're going to add the chart element here again. Click on that. If you're not seeing that, go to chart design and click on add chart element, and then axis titles, primary vertical. And then again, let's change that to kilograms and click off of the graph. Now, this is a relatively easy way of summarizing data. Now what we're going to do is try to summarize the male and female weight loss within diet type. And the way that we can do that is by selecting gender and going down and dragging that below diet type. But if you followed along with me, you're going to see there's already data in the pivot table graphing area, air, if you want to replace it. And if you do click that, what's going to happen is it overwrites stuff, and you don't want that to happen. And what's happening is Excel is trying to expand the pivot table, and it doesn't have room. And so what we're going to do is click on this stuff, just select it, and drag it down. And now, if we were to do the same procedure, click on gender and drag that down below diet type, you'll see that it doesn't give you that same error. It was able to expand without overwriting data. Let's go ahead and select, as we did before, all of the data between the blue areas. And let's copy and paste that as we did before below this data set. Okay. Let us then take a look at what we have. Okay. In this, we have summarized the female and the male data within cookie diet, the female and the male data within Kangatarian diet, and the female and the male data within Proletarian diet. What are these bold values here? Well, these bold values are the average of weight loss within cookie diet, regardless of female or male, and we see that is the same value as up here. Similarly, the average of Kangatarian weight loss, regardless of female or male, and we see that up here, and 3.3 is also replicated up here. These are not particularly useful, and they often confuse people, and so that's why I recommend deleting these bold values. Now, how can we graph this? Previously, we graphed female and male, and this was the complete average of female and male, regardless of diet type. Let's do that just for cookie diet. Let's graph that for cookie diet. Just select this data and go to Insert, and let's insert a two-dimensional bar graph. All right, it's easier to start simple. Now, we have female and male, and this is for cookie diet. We want to add in the Kangatarian and the Proletarian diet. How do we do that? Right-click on the graph and say Select Data. And this dialog box will show up. You'll see on the left-hand side that we have series. Now, you can think of these as sets of data that we want to graph. For every single set of data, it has to have the same x-axis categories. Click Edit for Series 1, and we're going to tell Excel that it is the cookie diet. Now, you can type that in, or if you wanted to, delete that, you can click on this little up arrow here, or on Macs, I think it's a slightly different icon. And then you can just select cookie diet right here, and Excel will know that is the same thing. We can press OK, and you can see that it did indeed put cookie diet down. Let's go ahead and add another series, and in this one we're going to call it Kangatarian, and you can also click the cell instead of me just typing it in. And now for the series values, we need to tell Excel what it wants. By default, it puts in 1, and you can see that it's trying to graph 1 right here, and that's not useful. Click on the up arrow right next to it, and you want to delete the equals 1 that's in brackets, and you want to replace it with the data for Kangatarian. Now, you don't want to select all of this. Do not select the x-axis categories because Excel does not need to know that. It's already assuming that what the x-axis categories are from the first data series. So all you have to do is select the 4.109 and the 2.607. Press enter or hit OK, and press OK again. Great, now we have two data sets in there. Repeat that process for the third one. Click on Add, and I'll type in Proletarian, or as I mentioned before, you can click on this up arrow and just click on the Proletarian cell right here. And then again for this, we're going to delete that equals 1 and just click on those two cells right there and press OK. And now we can hit OK again. And now you can see that we've graphed male and female within each cookie. Right, within each diet type. We have to give this graph a few more features to make it sensible. The first thing that we're going to do is, under Chart Design, go to Add Chart Element and click on Axis Chart Title first and say Above Chart. Let's call this Weight Loss of Males and Females within Diet Type. Title should be descriptive. Under Add Chart Element again, we want to add axis titles. So we're going to call this kilograms, just as we did before. Now, how do we know which bar refers to which bar? Well, you could always click on the bar set and it will highlight that for you, but we don't want to have to worry about that. We want to be able to just look at the graph and tell. And so let's click on the graph and go to Add Chart Element, or by the way, you can also click on the little plus icon right here and access quite a bit of options. For example, we want to add a legend, and so we can just click on Legend right here, and it defaults to putting the legend right there. If you want some more options, you can also click Add Chart Element Legend, and then it gives you the option of putting it at the top, the left, the bottom. The default is the right, and we're going to keep it as the right. Okay, and now you can see cookie diet in blue, Tangatarian diet in orange, Proletarian diet in gray. And remember, please don't change the colors that Excel gives. They're designed to be visible by all people, including those that are colorblind. And the next thing that I asked everybody to do, and this is what I asked you all to do on your own, is to graph this data with we're going to, right, so right, so I said graph the gender within BMI category. So we are going to drag the diet type out of there, and instead we're going to put BMI category above gender. And now you can see that we have this data set, which is the male and female within the BMI categories. Again, what we're going to do is select all of this data and copy and paste that outside of the pivot table. Let's put it down here. Once again, we can delete all of these bold values. They're not particularly useful. And we want to create a graph, just like we did here, but we want to create a graph where we have 4 data series. So we'll click Insert and 2-dimensional bar graph. And this is for female and male of normal, in the normal BMI category. Right-click on the data, on the graph, and say Select Data. We're going to edit this first series, and it's going to say Normal. Press OK or hit Enter. Add another data series. Let's call this one Obese. And we'll click on the little up icon and select the data for Obese. We'll add another series and call this one Overweight. And select the data for that. Press OK. Add another one, Underweight. And series values, again, are going to be these 2 data points right here. Okay? We'll press OK, and now we have our data. We have our graph. Let's go to Add Chart Element, Chart Title, Above Chart, and we'll say Weight Loss of males and females within BMI category. All right. Now we need a vertical axis. So axis titles, primary vertical, and we'll say kilograms. Once again, we need a legend. So oops, click on the graph again. If you clicked add chart element, legend, and let's put it on the left for this time, just because we can. All right. Once again, the colors are designed for visibility by all, so don't change that. Now, something weird happened is the kilograms, if we zoom in a little bit here, you can see that kilogram right here is off on the side. Why is that? Excel isn't particularly good at graphing things. Let's move that down. All right. Also, what it did is it moved this over, but if we do that, then we have a problem where this is overlapping. So it's often good to just put everything on the right hand side instead of the left. Okay. And then Excel is also being weird with me now, so I'm going to move that over, and this is looking like a nice graph. Out. Now, there's a few things that I wanted to point out. Number one is that we were able to edit or make all of these graphs without interfering with any of the other graphs, which we couldn't do if we used just the pivot table graphing features, which is possible if we click on the pivot table and we go to insert and we say a two-dimensional bar graph. Excel tries to create a bar graph for you. And in some ways, this makes sense. You know, it puts the female and the male within normal, obese, overweight, and underweight categories. But then if we wanted to change this pivot table, the graph itself would change. We don't want that. So I'm going to delete that. Another thing I wanted to point out to you is that within this type of graph, it's imperative that the x-axis labels are consistent. Another thing I want to point out to you is that within this type of graph, where we graph the series, or within this type of graph where we graph the series, it's imperative that the x-axis labels are in a consistent order because Excel isn't very smart. It's imperative that the female comes first and the male comes second for all of these, or it's imperative that the male comes first and the female comes second for all of these. It just so happened that the female comes first and the male comes second because of alphabetical ordering, and Excel defaults to alphabetical ordering. But let me show you what were to happen if we accidentally changed it for some reason. Take a look at the yellow bar here, the underweight category. Now, we have 4.13 and 1.975. Let's change the order here. Let's say this is male and this is female. And let's change this to its appropriate number, 1.975. And this one becomes 4.13. Now you notice that the yellow bars here were reversed, except the x-axis labels did not change. And the reason is because Excel is assuming that the values here are following the same order as the x-axis categories of your first data series. And so you can't have this situation if you want sensible graphs. I'm going to change that back around. All right. And there you go. There's some great pivot table graphing skills for you. All right, we're going to use this quite a bit in the future. So please, please, please make sure that you do understand this kind of graphing.